left. Once they got a clear shot, Semyon ordered to fire, hitting the enemy tank and destroying it. After the encounter, Konovalov tries to radio his allies but can't reach him, and so, he goes out of the tank to get a better view. Turns out the other tank was stuck in the mud. Konovalov wasn't pleased with how they left the battlefield without permission, and so, as punishment, the captain didn't tow them out of the mud. Later, on the way back to HQ, Konovalov opens the hatch and gets out of the tank to get a better view of the forest. He then notices something to his left. It was a German tank aiming its turret towards them. By the time Konovalov realized the situation, it was too late. The Panzer fires and hits them directly. The Soviet tank captain is sent flying while his crew is smoked. Afterward, the German tank goes after the Soviet tank stuck in the mud. After the unfortunate loss of his crew, Konovalov is lucky to be alive. A field doctor removes the debris from his body and patches him up. Soon, the captain wakes up in the makeshift hospital and sees the lone surviving member of his platoon gravely injured. Meanwhile, a group of soldiers salvages whatever tank parts they can. Rykov, a tank mech, asks an NCO named Armoured to keep demanding for tank parts from the higher-ups. Later, another soldier scavenging for parts named Gubkin shares with the two older soldiers that he heard of a miracle mechanic named Pavel Chumak that can repair anything and diagnose a machine just by touching it. At the nearby field, a German plane crashes after an intense dogfight. Not soon after, a woman in a motorbike arrives and asks for directions for HQ from the soldiers on standby. At the same time, the commander of the whole company argues with his XO, Major Krotov, that it's pointless to punish Konovalov for losing his men because, firstly, it wasn't his fault that they were ambushed. Secondly, Konovalov is a great commander, a master tactician. It will be a significant loss if they lose the captain. Later, the woman arrives and introduces herself to the commander as the company engineer named Pavla Chumak. Turns out the miracle mechanic was a woman. She tells the commander that she brought along new T-34 tanks and would like to get to work immediately. Meanwhile, the major sees the woman mechanic and immediately takes an interest. Soon, Rykov shows the woman engineer around and tells her about the damaged KV tanks. At the same time, a gunner named Sitov gets a sloppy welcome from Shinkovich, an overweight tank loader. Sitov is happy that he was coincidentally assigned to the same crew as his old friend, Gubkin. As soon as Konovalov recovers from his injuries, he immediately reports to the commander to resume his duties. He was assigned to commandeer tank number 8. Upon arrival, he sees Shinkovich gathering tons of fruits. When the captain introduces himself, Shinkovich comes to attention along with Sitov. Later, Rykov, the tank driver, shows the captain around the KV tank and reports its damages. The tank wasn't in good condition, and with the scheduled coordinated attack, Konovalov ordered Rykov to get the tank repaired. Later in a nearby tent, Pavla sees Konovalov, and the two seem to know each other but are intentionally ignoring each other. Pavla breaks the silence and offers to repair Konovalov's tank. But the stubborn captain declined, stating that he and his crew would manage it. The lady engineer insisted, but Konovalov wasn't having it. Early the next day, Konovalov tests the efficacy of his men. He had them mount the tank, but they were kind of sloppy, so he had them do it repeatedly until they got in before 6 seconds is up. On top of the mounted drill, he had them run for a few kilometers. He had them repeat the cycle until the men improved. Later that evening, Shinkovich prepares food for the men. Meanwhile, the major is seen sitting beside the Pavla. He was trying so hard to impress the only female in the camp that he started telling war stories. Meanwhile, Sitov tries to fix a phonograph and enjoy some music. Armin sees the confused sergeant and informs him that the music machine was working fine this morning. The two argued, and Pavla saw the commotion. As an engineer, she prides herself that she can fix everything. She removes the cap, starts unscrewing things, and gets to work. The Pavla returns the cover in less than a minute and tests it out. Sitov and Armin's jaws dropped in amazement. She was able to fix the phonograph in less than a minute. Truly a mechanical genius. With the music playing, the major takes the opportunity to ask her to dance, but Pavla politely declines. Afterward, Pavla approaches Konovalov and tries to convince him to get a new tank. But if it means getting help from the major, Konovalov rather drives a piece of scrap metal. The captain was stubborn as they come. Pavla proactively repaired Konovalov's KV tank earlier but couldn't get her hands on an injector. The captain decides to gamble and salvage some parts in the wrecks to make up for this. Deep into the night, Konovalov, along with Sitov and Rykov, takes a dangerous visit to a field full of destroyed tanks. They salvage whatever they can and loads it into the truck. Suddenly, they hear something from a distance. They decide to investigate. And with the cover of darkness, they see a few Germans doing the same thing, salvaging for some spare parts. Konovalov chooses to capture a German Nazi. The captain slowly approaches from the back, tackles the man, and covers his mouth. Rykov then taps on the truck, signaling it to go. A flawless execution. Back at camp, Major Krotov scolds Konovalov for breaking military discipline and army regulations. Clearly, Krotov was doing it out of spite. Nonetheless, the commander comes to Konovalov and his men's rescue and commends them for doing a job well done in capturing a prisoner. The captured Kraut would prove useful since they need some intel on the enemy's position. Later, Konovalov and his crew were surprised when Palva managed to revive the old and beaten KV tank. The crew couldn't contain their happiness and immediately did a test run. Meanwhile, Krotov was briefing another tank commander when he saw Konovalov's tank rev to life. He orders the tank commander to take Konovalov with him in the mission despite knowing full well that tank number 8 is in no condition. Palva confronts Krotov and asks him not to let tank number 8 go, but the major isn't heeding any of her pleas. Konovalov sees Palva pleading to the major, tells Palva to stop, and then leaves for the mission. Later at the nearby field, the tanks are on a mission run. When Konovalov orders Rykov to speed up, the gear wasn't budging. The old driver figures that the gear gate has been broken. The other tank commander sees the situation and orders Konovalov's crew to retreat. Soon after, the tank can't even move forward, so they have to go move in reverse. The brilliant captain then figures something is up in the small settlement nearby and orders Rykov to position the tank on a slope for a better angle. He continues to monitor the place. Later, Konovalov decides to make a bluff by firing at the settlement grounds. It worked. 3 German tanks emerge and start charging. A German panzer scores a hit, but the shell bounced off the KV armor. The Soviet tank crew fires back and destroys a panzer. But still, the Germans outnumbered Konovalov 2-1 and continued with their advance. As they got close, Sitov managed to make a bullseye. 1 tank remains, and the tables have turned. The 2 other Russian tanks circle around, completely surrounding the German panzer on both ends. It didn't take long before it was hit from the front and back. After the firefight, the old KV tank was towed to HQ. As soon as Konovalov sees his rival, Krotov, he punches the major in the face. The 2 were beating each other up. It only stops when the commander breaks up the fight. The commander doesn't like infighting, and so, to settle the grudges, the old commander decides to have them compete in the best possible way. By playing football. Konovalov's crew versus Krotov's. The 2 were very competitive, but in the end, the game ended 2-1 with Krotov's crew as the winner. That night, the commander asks the captain why he took a defective tank on a mission. The captain didn't stay quiet, not wanting to snitch. The major soon speaks up and admits that it was his doing. The commander stays calm. After the meeting, the commander informs Major Krotov that he should have checked Pavla's ID. Her married name is Konovalov, which can only mean she's the captain's wife. Later, everybody gets busy and prepares for the all-out offensive. With Konovalov's KV not running, the crew has to fight as regular infantry. Pavla helps the captain and his crew repair the KV tank before the attack. But time ran out, and after all the hard work, the tank still didn't come to life. With a bit of time before the attack, Krotov apologizes to his rival, stating that he didn't know that Pavla was his wife. If he'd known, he wouldn't approach her in the first place. The captain accepts the man's apology and jokes with him. The time has come. Sitov and the others grab their machine gun and head for the front lines. Meanwhile, the captain stays behind for a second to bid his wife farewell and apologizes to her for all his mistakes. Later, an intel officer sees Pavla crying and tells her that the captured Kraut squealed that there's a KV hidden in the forest but lacks a 24F relay. Pavla rejoices since she knows where to get one. The attack was rather fierce, but the Germans were just as vicious. Casualties piles up from both sides. When a soldier gets his hand stuck in a tank track, Rykov runs over with a knife to save the poor soldier. As soon as Rykov frees the unknown soldier, the old driver gets hit in the chest. Rykov's crewmates ran over to check on him, but it wasn't long before he breathed his last. In the middle of the firefight, Krotov shouts to the captain that Pavla finds a KV tank at the fork somewhere in the nearby forest. The captain gathers his crew and orders them to go with him and get the tank running. They arrived in the woods but couldn't see the tank. A few minutes later, they hear an engine come to life. The crew immediately ran over and was glad to see a functioning KV tank. The husband and wife reunite and heads towards the fighting. On the way, they see a German personnel carrier and destroy it in one shot. Unbeknownst to them, it was actually followed by no less than 10 Panzer tanks. They're too far away from Allies and couldn't call for backup. But they have enough shells and more than enough fuel. The crew decides to fight despite being outnumbered. The KV tank backs up to the tree line to hide itself. Not soon after, Sitov takes aim, fires his shot, and destroys an enemy tank in one hit. The German tank squadron got alarmed but still couldn't spot the KV's position. They destroyed a second tank but remained incognito. After hitting and destroying the third tank, their positions were revealed. The KV then makes a bold move and makes a frontal attack. The Germans score a hit, but the shell bounces off the armor. With Konovalev's brilliant maneuvering, they managed to destroy a good number of German tanks. But their tracks are hit. Sienkiewicz goes down the hatch to repair it. Meanwhile, Konovalov sees a German anti-tank gun adjusting its aim toward them. As soon as Sienkiewicz finishes with the repairs, Pavla drives off, dragging Sienkiewicz along. Sitov fires the cannon, eliminating the flak gun and its crew. As soon as the coast is clear, Gubkin runs over to his mate, but it is too late. Later that evening, the fight continues. Soon, their KV tank was hit, and they couldn't move. Still surrounded by enemies, they have no choice but to escape through the floor hatch. A German tank gets a clear shot and fires at the lone Russian tank. It's a direct hit. Gubkin is no longer of this world while Pavla gets knocked out. Sitov and Konovalov manage to carry the engineer out of the burning tank. Meanwhile, the German officer that manages to destroy the KV tank goes out of the hatch to savor the victory. But unknown to them, the two Russians were taking cover. Sitov and Konovalov decide to make a frontal attack and crush the Germans dead. The movie ends with the battle coming to an end.